I walked onto the plane like a ghost, not because anyone knew who I was, but because it felt like no one wanted to know. I had my uniform on, neatly pressed, with a small badge pinned above the heart. But to the rest of the passengers boarding flight 482 that day, I was just another body taking up space in first class. I could feel it. The sideways glances, the polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the quiet judgment in the silence. I clutched my boarding pass tighter and made my way to seat 1A, the very front row, window seat, first class. It had been booked for me by someone at the base part of a quiet send-off after 18 years of service. No fanfare, just a seat, just a flight, just a moment to breathe, and maybe forget how much it still hurt. As I sat down, I kept my eyes low. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. I'd learned to make myself small, invisible when needed. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining why I was traveling alone, why no one had come to see me off, why my parents had told me just days earlier, "It would be better if you didn't come back." My name is Elena Cross. I was a colonel in the United States Army. I served 4 tours overseas, led countless missions, trained cadets who now wear stars on their shoulders. But none of that mattered that day. Not in that seat. Not when I was still reeling from the sound of my mother's voice, cold, flat, final. I stared out the window, watching the baggage handlers move beneath us like tiny workers in a snow globe. My chest felt heavy, but I refused to cry. I hadn't cried when my father stopped speaking to me. I didn't cry when I signed the report that cost him his business license. I didn't cry when I stood alone at my promotion ceremony, so I wasn't about to cry now. The flight attendants moved through the aisle with the usual routine smiles, greetings, offers of orange juice or champagne. When they reached me, one of them paused. She looked at her tablet, then at me. "You're in 1A?" she asked, uncertain. "Yes, ma'am," I said quietly. She gave me a strange look, like maybe there had been a mistake, like maybe someone like me didn't belong there. But she didn't say anything else, just nodded and walked away. I exhaled slowly. That kind of look wasn't new to me. I had gotten it all my life, from classmates, from coworkers, from strangers in grocery store aisles. It was the look that said, "I don't know where to put you." The cabin filled up quickly. People settled into their seats. The buzz of conversation filled the air. A child cried somewhere near the back. The man across from me kept adjusting his briefcase. Someone was already snoring a few rows behind, but all I could hear was my mother's voice echoing in my head. "You made your choice, Elena. Don't come here looking for a welcome." I hadn't expected a parade. I hadn't even expected forgiveness, but some part of me had hoped that, after all this time, they would at least be proud that I stood for something, that I gave my life quietly, completely to serve. But instead, I was leaving behind a family who saw me not as a daughter, but as a traitor. The lights dimmed slightly as the plane prepared for takeoff. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the lift, for the climb, for the silence that always settled over me once the wheels left the ground. That's when the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, calm and clear, "before we depart, I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special on board today." I opened my eyes slowly. People shifted in their seats. The air changed. And in that instant, I felt something coming. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not shame, but recognition. The moment the captain spoke, the entire cabin went still. You could feel it like the air itself had paused, waiting. His voice came again, steady and respectful. "Today, we have someone flying with us who has given more than most of us will ever understand. A soldier, a leader, a woman who has served our country for nearly 2 decades. The words struck me like thunder in my chest. My hands froze on my lap. She boarded quietly, expecting no attention. But today, we're not going to let her slip by unnoticed. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't move. I couldn't. Every eye in that cabin slowly turned. The passengers who had looked past me a few minutes ago were now turning toward seat 1A, toward me. The captain's voice softened but grew more powerful somehow. Colonel Elena Cross, on behalf of the entire crew of Flight 482, we thank you for your service, for your sacrifice, for showing us what it truly means to lead with honor. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened. I had heard many things during my career orders, commands, even words of praise, but this felt different. Then, just as the words were settling in, the cockpit door opened. Out stepped the captain. He was tall, composed, with silver at his temples and eyes that had clearly seen years in the skies. He walked straight down the aisles low, purposeful, and stopped right in front of me. He stood at attention, and then he saluted. Not a quick nod, not a casual gesture, a full, crisp military salute. My heart was pounding now. People around us were silent, watching. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. A man behind her lowered his phone, as if realizing this moment wasn't meant to be captured, just felt. I stood up slowly, unsure what to do. My training kicked in. Out of instinct, I returned the salute. He held his position a second longer, then let his hand fall. "Welcome aboard, Colonel," he said softly. "It's an honor to have you." I nodded, but words wouldn't come. My throat burned, and all I could do was whisper, "Thank you, sir." The captain gave a small smile, placed a hand over his heart, and returned to the cockpit. For a moment, I just stood there, not sure whether to sit or cry or disappear. But then something happened. A woman across the aisle leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for everything." The man with the briefcase looked up and said, "We're lucky to have people like you." Row by row, passengers began to speak. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet words of respect. A hand on the shoulder, a nod, a smile that finally reached someone's eyes. And I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. The announcement wasn't about attention. It wasn't about praise. It was about seeing someone fully, for the first time in a long time. The flight attendants came by again, but this time, their smiles felt different, warmer, genuine. The one who had questioned my seat earlier placed a glass of water gently in front of me. "If you need anything, Colonel, please let us know." I nodded, finally allowing myself a small smile. As the engines roared and the plane began to move, I looked out the window again. The same world was out there, but something had shifted inside me. I still didn't know what would come next. I still didn't have a home to return to. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel alone in the world. Sometimes, it takes a stranger to remind you that your story matters. And sometimes, the smallest momenta pause, a voice, a salute can stitch something back together inside you that you thought was lost forever. As the plane leveled out and the seatbelt sign turned off, I sank back into my seat. My heart was still beating fast. Everything felt surreal. The silence around me slowly gave way to quiet chatter, clinking glasses, and the soft rustle of magazines and snack wrappers. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the air. I wasn't just another passenger anymore. People saw me now, not just the uniform, not just the title, but me. A few minutes later, the woman sitting across the aisle leaned over again. She looked like someone's grandmother, with soft eyes and a calming smile. "I have a grandson in the Navy," she said gently. "I worry every day. What you do, what you've done. I just want to say thank you." I smiled, this time more easily. "He's lucky to have you," I said. She chuckled. "I think I'm the lucky one." We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. Further back, I heard someone quietly humming a tune. A toddler was giggling, kicking the seat ahead of her, while her father tried to keep her calm. It was such a normal moment, but I found myself watching, soaking it in. I had missed these little scenes of everyday life. In the military, you move so fast. You learn to block out distractions, to focus only on what matters. But now, these tiny human moments felt like gold. Somewhere over Colorado, the flight attendant came by again, this time with a cup of hot coffee. "Compliments of the captain," she said with a wink. I thanked her and wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth sink in. I found myself thinking about my parents again. I had left their house with my heart bruised and raw. They had tried to be supportive over the years, in their own way. But the gap between us had only widened. They never understood why I stayed in the military so long, why I kept re-enlisting, why I chose deployments over holidays. My father once said, "At some point, you have to stop running." But he never understood I wasn't running. I was serving. I was giving my life to something that gave mine meaning. Still, the distance hurt. The way they asked me to leave that day, I knew it wasn't out of cruelty. It was pain, exhaustion, maybe fear. But it still felt like being cast out of my own story. I looked out the window again. Clouds rolled by like soft hills of light, endless and silent. My thoughts drifted to my last deployment, Afghanistan. The dust, the heat, the sound of rotor blades slicing the sky. I had lost 2 soldiers in that tour. 2 names I would never forget. I could still hear their laughter on quiet nights, still see their faces in the flicker of campfire light. People often think soldiers are tough because they don't cry. But that's not it. We're tough because we carry the weight of so many stories our own, and those we couldn't protect. As I stared into the clouds, a memory surfaced. It was from 3 years ago. A small village. A school that had been rebuilt after months of effort. I remembered watching local kids run barefoot across the new floor, their laughter echoing in the dusty walls. One little girl handed me a flower, a wild daisy. She didn't speak English, but she smiled with her whole soul. That smile had stayed with me through every dark day after. The flight continued smoothly. Some people slept. Others read or scrolled through their phones. I closed my eyes for a bit, not to sleep, but just to breathe. Then something unexpected happened. The man sitting behind me tapped my shoulder. I turned, and he handed me a small envelope. "My brother served," he said. "He didn't make it home. I wanted to say thanks for everything you did, for him, for all of them." I took the envelope slowly. My fingers trembled. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. He nodded. He was proud. We all were. He would have wanted to salute you, too. I held on to that envelope like it was made of glass. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, quietly. It's strange how strangers can reach into your life and offer healing in a way that people closest to you sometimes can't. On that plane, I felt seen. Not just as a soldier, but as a person who had given, who had hurt, who had tried. As we started descending toward our destination, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I didn't know where I would sleep that night. I didn't know if my parents would ever fully understand me. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Because sometimes healing doesn't come in big gestures. It comes in a moment, a nod, a kind word, a stranger's quiet gratitude. And somewhere over the clouds, I realized I didn't need to carry it all alone anymore. When the plane finally touched down, the wheels hitting the tarmac with a gentle thud, I felt something loosen in my chest. The kind of release that only comes after a long journey, both in miles and in meaning. As the passengers gathered their belongings and the usual rustling and overhead bin battles began, I stayed seated for a moment, clutching the envelope from the man behind me. I didn't want to rush. I didn't want the weight of the moment to pass too quickly. Everything in life had felt like a rush for so long. Orders, missions, deadlines, flights. But right now, I had nowhere to be. No one barking instructions. No gear to haul. Just this moment. When I finally stood up, a few passengers gave me a polite nod, and 1 or 2 softly said, "Thank you." There was no spotlight, no announcement, just quiet recognition. And honestly, that meant more. As I walked through the terminal, my boots echoing lightly on the polished floor, I took out the envelope. There was a folded note inside. The handwriting was a little shaky but clear. It read, "For the one who made it home, thank you for carrying those who didn't. You are not forgotten." and neither are they. I stopped walking for a moment, letting those words sink in. I had no idea who that man was. I'd probably never see him again. But he left something with me that I couldn't explain, a kind of quiet permission to be proud and still be human. Outside, the air was warm and still. I hadn't really planned where I was going next. I hadn't booked a hotel. My phone buzzed a few times, messages coming in, but I didn't check them yet. I wasn't ready to be pulled back into the noise. I decided to walk for a while. Just breathe. Just exist. After a few blocks, I stopped at a small coffee shop with outdoor seating. It looked cozy, with flower boxes and people laughing over pastries. I ordered a cup of black coffee and sat down. For a while, I just watched people pass by. Couples holding hands, kids on scooters, a woman talking to her dog, like it understood every word. And as I sat there, I thought about my parents, about the words they said before I left, about the pain behind them, about the years of not understanding each other. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over my mom's number. I didn't know what I would say. I didn't even know if she'd answer. But something in me, maybe from that envelope or the people on the plane, told me it was time to try. I hit call. It rang twice, then 3 times. And then, her voice is soft, unsure. Hello? I froze for a second. Then I found my words. Hey, it's me. I just landed. There was a pause, then a shaky breath. Are you okay? I think so, I said. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, and I'm thinking about you. Another pause. Then her voice broke a little. We miss you. I miss you too, I said, my voice catching. We didn't solve everything in that call. We didn't unpack years of distance in one conversation. But it was a start, a small bridge being built, one word at a time. After we hung up, I sat there a little longer, letting the quiet settle in again. The sun had begun to dip, casting a warm orange glow across the street. The world didn't feel so heavy anymore. Still complicated, sure, still messy, but lighter somehow. And I realized something else. I didn't have to have all the answers right now. I didn't need a 5-year plan or a perfect solution. I had breath in my lungs. I had people who cared. I had strangers who reminded me of my worth, and family I was finally ready to reach for. That was enough for today. So I took another sip of coffee, let out a long breath, and looked toward the sky-soft streaks of color painting the clouds. Tomorrow, I'd figure out the next step. But tonight, I was home. Maybe not in a physical place, maybe not in a house, but in a moment where I felt seen, grounded, and finally, at peace. The next morning, I woke up early. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The hotel room was quiet, the sunlight pouring in through the curtains. I sat up slowly, stretching, feeling my muscles ache in the way that reminded me I was still adjusting to civilian life. But it was a good kind of ache. Not pain, not pressure, just a reminder that I was still here, still standing. I made myself a small cup of coffee from the machine on the dresser and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. People walked dogs, joggers passed by, and buses hummed down the street. There was a peace in the normalness of it all. No one yelling, no alarms, just life, moving on. I checked my phone and saw a few texts. One from an old high school friend who'd heard I was back. Another from my mom, just a simple, "Call me when you're free. I made your favorite soup." That one made me smile. I didn't answer either just yet. Instead, I got dressed, grabbed my bag, and decided to go for a walk. No destination in mind, just walking to feel the ground beneath my feet, to remind myself I wasn't somewhere else. I was here. I wandered into a park I used to visit as a kid. The trees were taller now, the benches a little older, but it still felt the same. I sat on one of those benches for a while, just breathing, listening to the sounds of birds and kids playing. Then, I heard someone say my name. I turned, and there he was, Marcus. We'd grown up together, Played football in the backyard, snuck into the movies as teens, lost touch after high school. He looked the same, just older, like me. Same warm eyes, same easy smile. "Man, I thought that was you," he said, walking over. "I saw your mom the other day. She told me you were back. I didn't believe it." I stood and we hugged, the kind of hug that speaks more than words can. It felt good real. We ended up grabbing coffee from a nearby cart and sitting on the steps of the old library. He asked about the places I'd been, the people I met, the things I'd seen. I didn't go into too much detail. Some things are hard to explain, but he listened. No judgment, no pity, just presence. Then I asked about him. He was married now. 2 kids. Taught music at the local school. His life had gone in a completely different direction, and somehow, that was comforting. It reminded me that the world kept turning, even when you were far away. Before we parted, he looked at me and said, "If you ever need a place to breathe, man, my door's open." Seriously. I nodded, grateful. I might take you up on that. As we went our separate ways, I realized something important. I wasn't starting over. I wasn't rebuilding from nothing. I was reconnecting to people, to memories, to places that had shaped me long before the uniform ever did. That afternoon, I finally went home. I stood outside the house for a few minutes before walking in. The porch looked the same. The door creaked just like it used to. My dad opened it. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me for a long second. Then, he stepped aside. Inside, the kitchen smelled like ginger and lemongrass. My mom had been cooking. She turned around, saw me, and for a moment, her eyes just welled up. She didn't rush to me. She didn't cry out. She just reached for my hand, quietly, and held it. We sat at the table, ate in silence at first. Then slowly, we talked. Not just about the war or what had happened, but about memories. About things we'd all missed. About my brother's graduation, my cousin's wedding, even our old dog passing away. The little things that somehow meant everything. We didn't solve everything that day. Some wounds take time, some don't fully heal, but something shifted. The walls weren't as high, the air wasn't as heavy. We were learning how to be around each other again. Not perfectly, but honestly, that night, I lay in my old room. The posters were gone, but the creaky bed and faded curtains were the same. I stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the sound of crickets outside the window, feeling both strange and safe at the same time. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't worried about what came next. I didn't need every answer. I just needed this moment. I was home not just in a house, not just in a city, but in the presence of people who loved me, even if they didn't always know how to show it. That was enough for now. Tomorrow could wait. The next few days slipped by like pages turning in a familiar book. There was comfort and routine again, waking up to the scent of my mom's morning coffee, hearing my dad's footsteps in the hallway, watching the neighbor mow his lawn like he did every Thursday for the past 20 years. It felt strange how quickly life wrapped itself around me again, like it had just been waiting. One afternoon, I decided to drive out to the airport. Not for any flight, not to go anywhere, just to watch. I stood behind the large glass windows, watching planes take off, land, taxi down the runways. People rushed in and out with luggage, holding boarding passes, some hugging goodbye, some crying hello. I didn't know what drew me there exactly, but I stood still for a long while, lost in the quiet chaos of it all. Then I heard a soft voice behind me. "Hey, you're the guy from the other day, right? On the flight?" I turned, and there she was, the flight attendant from before. Her name tag read, Leah. She smiled, holding a tray of coffee from one of the vendors inside. "I was off duty that day," she said, stepping beside me to look out at the tarmac. "But I heard about it. The pilot, the salute. People were talking about it in the crew room all week." I laughed, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, that was unexpected." She handed me one of the coffees. "You looked like you didn't get a chance to breathe that day." We stood there for a bit, sipping coffee and watching the world move. She didn't ask questions. She didn't probe. It was just easy, conversation light, effortless. She told me she'd been flying for 7 years, said she'd seen everything from in-flight weddings to nervous flyers who cried during takeoff. Then she looked at me and asked, "Do you miss it? Being away?" I thought for a moment. "Parts of it, maybe," I said honestly. "But not the weight. Not the feeling that everything could change in a second. I think I just miss purpose, structure, being part of something bigger." She nodded. "You still are." We chatted a little longer before she had to go. As she left, she turned and said, "Take your time. You don't have to figure it all out at once." That sentence stayed with me as I walked back to the car. Maybe that's what I'd been trying to do-force everything to make sense again, right now. But maybe healing wasn't about answers. Maybe it was about small steps, quiet moments, coffee with strangers who reminded you that you weren't alone. Later that evening, I sat down with my parents in the living room. We watched an old movie together, the kind we used to watch when I was a kid. There wasn't much talking, just the soft hum of the TV, the warmth of being in the same room. My mom fell asleep halfway through, curled up under a blanket. My dad looked over at me, gave a small nod, then turned back to the screen. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. But it was enough. Each day felt a little lighter. I started writing in a journal, just short entries what I saw, what I felt, what I remembered. I met up with Marcus again, this time for a burger and a beer. We talked about nothing and everything, and it didn't feel forced. I even stopped by the school where he taught, sat in the back of a music class and watched kids laugh and play instruments wildly out of tune. And weirdly, that sound made me smile more than anything had in months. One evening, while walking home, I passed a kid riding his bike, wobbling on training wheels. His dad jogged behind him, arms out, just in case he tipped over. The boy looked terrified but also thrilled, like he was learning to fly. I paused and watched for a second, then kept walking. It hit me right then. Maybe that's what I was doing too, wobbling forward, scared, uncertain, but still moving, still learning. And that, in itself, was something worth holding on to. A few weeks later, I found myself waking up earlier. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The mornings were quieter now, and I started each day with a walk around the neighborhood. Just me, the birds, and the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze. It became a small ritual, something grounding. I didn't bring my phone. No music, no distractions. Just space to think, breathe, and notice the world again. One morning, I passed by the local library. I hadn't been inside in years. On a whim, I walked in. The scent of old books hit me instant familiar and comforting. I wandered through the aisles, fingers trailing across spines, and then I stumbled into a small community board near the front desk. A flyer caught my eye. Writing workshop for veterans. Saturdays at 10 a.m. My hand hovered over it. I wasn't sure why I cared, but I took a picture of it anyway. That Saturday, I showed up. The room was small, 6 chairs in a circle. A woman in her 60s led the session. Her name was Joan, and she greeted everyone with a warm smile. There were only 4 of us, 2 men around my age, 1 older gentleman, and me. At first, nobody spoke much. Joan asked us to write about something we missed. Not war stories. Not dramatic moments. Just something simple. I stared at my paper for a while before I wrote, the feeling of knowing exactly where I was supposed to be. After I read it aloud, there was silence. Then one of the other guys, Nate, nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's it." It was like a door opened. Week after week, we kept coming back, sharing bits of ourselves, not trying to be deep or perfect, just honest. We wrote about old routines, smells that reminded us of home, things we didn't even realize we missed. Nobody judged. Nobody had to explain. We just listened. It helped, more than I expected. Outside of those sessions, I started helping out at a local youth center. Just once a week at first. They were teaching kids basic mechanic show to build go-karts, fix up bikes. I didn't know much about working with kids, but they didn't care. They just liked having someone around who listened and let them figure things out on their own. I realized that showing up mattered more than having all the answers, and maybe that was the point. Healing wasn't about fixing everything. It wasn't about going back to who I was. It was about becoming someone new with the same heart, but a deeper understanding of what matters. Purpose didn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it looked like a quiet room full of people with pens, or a kid figuring out how to tighten a bolt without dropping it, or a friend texting you to meet for lunch, just because. I didn't need to be on a battlefield to serve. I didn't need to wear a uniform to feel proud. I just had to live, fully, honestly, and keep showing up, one step at a time. In the end, this story wasn't really about a flight, or even about being asked to leave home. It was about something deeper, finding your place in a world that doesn't always make that easy. We saw how one moment of heartbreak led to a journey of growth, reflection, and quiet courage. From the raw pain of being told to leave, to the unexpected respect shown by a pilot in front of hundreds of strangers, to the slow process of rebuilding a life step by step, all came together to paint a powerful picture of resilience. At its heart, this was a story about family, identity, and the strength it takes to keep moving forward when everything feels like it's falling apart. It reminded us that sometimes, the people who love us the most don't always know how to show it. And sometimes, the journey we're meant to take begins in the most painful ways. The core message is simple but powerful. You are more than the worst day you've had. You are more than someone else's judgment or rejection. Your worth doesn't depend on who accepts you. It comes from within. If you're watching this and you've ever felt unwanted, misunderstood, or out of place, know this. You're not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And there is space in this world for the real you. Maybe today is hard. Maybe your family doesn't see you clearly. Maybe you've been told to walk away from something that meant everything. But just like the person in this story, you have the power to take that pain and turn it into something new, something strong, something meaningful. So take a deep breath. Look around. Start where you are. Reach out, speak up, and never stop showing up for yourself even when others don't. Because sometimes the respect you deserve comes when you least expect it. And more often than not, your next chapter begins the moment you decide not to give up. Thank you for watching, and wherever you are on your journey, we're cheering you on.